Yama, Yam Durang, thank you for coming. My signature's on that artefact. It was good to sign it then, and it's good to see it again because that lovely painting's been around Australia, and it continues to be our message to everyone. My name is Lord Mayor. I'm the chairperson of the Metropolitan Local Land Council. I'm here on behalf of the members of the Aboriginal Land Council, but more importantly, I want to welcome you to this great land called Gadigal. I want to pay respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. As you know, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been in this country for 40,000 years. You can walk with us, we'll walk with you. We can show you this lovely statement, but more importantly, if you walk with us, we'll walk with you, and we can demonstrate to you how to survive in this country. And that's one of those things about this lovely artwork. It represents all the clans coming together to pay respects to, I suppose, the oldest First Nations people of Australia. With that, have a great evening. I say this, respect, collaborate, love this moment because not all Australians get to share a lovely painting like this and also the people behind it. With that, have a great evening. Thank you.
Ngayon kuha rin main kanya. Para pukula rin ang orang yang kuwer ka. Nyurang main kanya. Ngayon ini Josephine Mick. Ngayon pijang wa IP waingo. Para ngayon ini nyat laila.
My mum's going to just sing you guys a song which is about Uluru. We come from the APY lands and we're very happy to be here with you representing our family.
Ulurunya, 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 nyudu banganamba, uan garaku, nyudu banganamba, uan garaku, ulurunya, 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 nyudu banganamba, uan garaku. In manyang aja, nya rain jago jarang ngajar ringot, karena dalam drum music ngangi, ulun jara. Ano uan karaku, ulun yang ora wiru, nyundomba mano uan karaku, ora uan kijaku.
So Mum's saying that that drum beat came from Canada after some traditional rangers from Mudijulu had gone across and the ladies from the community had put those words together, and so the lyrics literally goes, Uluru is ours, Uluru is yours, Uluru is for everybody, and that's the same for the voice. Thank you.
It's a privilege to be here, to sing in this room. If I can stay on the chair. I think this needs to come in. That's all right, I've got a bit to say anyway. to be in this room, to be singing for you in this room, to be there we go. To be singing on this country. Thank you for that welcome. I'm lucky enough to live here. I was born in Melbourne, Naarm. My children are born here, and we like it very much. I'm from Central Australia. I'm Eastern Islander and Gurindji. On my mother's side and on my dad's side, I'm Irish descent. And my wife is Welsh and Chinese descent. So our kids are awesome. And exhausting. I just had a double espresso before. This is a pretty late night for me. But it's a privilege to be here on this country, in this building, and at an event like this. And I'm going to sing a song, and then I'll be back later to sing a couple more. Thanks very much. Now there's a note at my door. We don't want you around. And I felt the fear the first time that I found out. And I was just a boy, and I carry the weight. Now that I'm older, it sits on my shoulder. Tell me to cast it away, and tell me how I'm meant to feel. Tell me my past and my shame isn't real. You're entitled to think what you like. It's true. This story is mine. Now you broadcast your words down your gold microphone, designed to remind them that this ain't my home anymore. Oh, but I know who I am, my blood to the core. Oh, and I'll tell my children there'll be no more notes on the door. Oh, you tell me to cast it away, and tell me how I'm meant to feel. Tell me my past and my shame isn't real. You're entitled to think what you like. It's true. This story is mine. You're entitled to think what you like. It's true. This story is mine. It's true. This story is mine. It's true. True. This story is mine. Thank you.
The world is in a pretty dangerous place right now, ecologically, militarily, economically, politically. You know, we are off script and we don't know what to expect, which is a moment when societies are pretty vulnerable. So it's more important than ever to gather, come together, tell each other stories that help us orient ourselves in time and space and history, because we need to keep our wits about us in this moment.
I think that our countries like Australia and Canada really rest on a myth of benevolence. We paint ourselves to be champions of human rights, while at home we're actively marginalizing the people that lack basic access to resources.
What we've got is an environment in which we're almost licensing racist comments, intolerance, a lack of humanity. We're politically almost licensing this.
The current system has been based on the lack of capacity to really bring equity to all humans, and so many people are being left behind, and people are losing their spirituality and their connectivity to the land and the resources and the dynamics about how to keep things in the balance.
In every aspect of our society, we see these inequalities. We see how much we need to do in order to create even a basic modicum of social justice. And it means rewriting the rules of the market economy.
It's not enough to just have an absence of war. We need equality. We need everybody's voices to be heard.
Extraordinary leaders around the world have powerful solutions to the world's biggest problems, but we need to be able to hear from them. We spotlight and amplify the voices of local and international change makers.
Peace with justice means really at least a trinity of ideas about universal human rights, about the language and practice of non-violence, and about the vision of a common humanity. You mix those ingredients together and you finish up with peace with justice.
The Sydney Peace Foundation is a small foundation of the University of Sydney, and we're funded by the City of Sydney. We're very pleased to have Clover Moore, the Lord Mayor, as our patron.
The whole movement of the Peace Prize has been really important, and the prize has brought out sometimes quite controversial but really significant figures who've played a role in working for peace. And you know, the city community supported that, and I'm proud of that.
We want to create a peaceful, fair and just world that cares for people and the planet through energising public debate and inspiring Australians to act. We do this through the annual Sydney Peace Prize, Australia's only international prize for peace, and the occasional gold medal for human rights.
We need to now be the generation that makes the movement, makes the change within our world.
Together we can push forward an idea. We can make our voices heard and make those in power change their ways to peace and justice.
It's good to live in harmony, so we can feel like a whole big family even though we're from different backgrounds. And that's what makes our world better and more colourful, more bright and more peaceful.
We all have our lane in this movement. If you don't know what yours is, find a local organisation that you feel inspired by and just get involved.
So lovely not to be able to see you all out there, but I know you're there, dear friends. My name is Susan Biggs, and I'm the Director of the Sydney Peace Foundation. Thank you for joining us tonight, and welcome to the 21-22 Sydney Peace Prize Lecture. We are absolutely thrilled to be together after a 3-year absence due to the pandemic. Huge thanks to Alan Murray for his generous and warm welcome to country. And I recognise the traditional custodians of the land and acknowledge their elders past and present. I pay my respects to all First Nations peoples joining us this evening. Sovereignty over this land has never been ceded, and it always was, always will be Aboriginal land. A huge thank you to Josephine Mick, a Pitjantjatjara woman from the API lands in South Australia. Josephine is a senior traditional healer, artist and cultural leader in Central Australia. As a proud mother and grandmother, Josephine is looking forward to seeing the voice bring a better tomorrow for the next generation. Sally Scales, who accompanied Josephine on the stage, is part of the government's working group on the Uluru Statement. Women have been deeply embedded in the development of the Uluru Statement from the Heart and the leadership of this campaign. They've shown up and kept it going and kept the campaign together. From the two co-chairs of the Uluru Dialogues, both powerful Aboriginal women in their own right, to the dialogue members and the delegates at the regional dialogues, women are the ones in communities that often do the heavy lifting without recognition. They carry that burden and still work hard to show up to make it work. It matters for how business is conducted too. Consultation, it's a cast of thousands, but it's deliberately that way. It's a community movement and change built on the power of dialogue that draws its authority from relationships. Tonight, you will hear from two very strong and passionate women. These women have been striving for peace and justice for decades. And I know in the audience we have many delegates themselves to the Uluru Dialogues who are equally to be honoured tonight with this awarding of the Sydney Peace Prize. I and the whole Sydney Peace Foundation community are beyond delighted to be awarding this prize to the Uluru Statement. And we are ready to stand with you to push for a yes vote on the Voice to Parliament. Woo! Unfortunately, Noel Pearson cannot be with us tonight as he's unwell. We wish him a speedy recovery. Alongside Megan and Pat, Noel has been an unrelenting driver of the statement from its development to the campaign today. I'd like to welcome our special guest tonight. Of course, all of you here who've participated in the Uluru Dialogues, you honour us by being here. Lord Mayor Clover Moore and the City of Sydney councillors. The Sydney Peace Prize 2012 laureate and human rights champion, Sekai Holland, all the way from Zimbabwe. And a huge thank you to our partners who helped us make this year's Peace Prize events possible. The City of Sydney, the Fred Hollows Foundation, the University of Sydney Law School, PwC Australia, the Australia Institute, the University of Melbourne and the City of Melbourne, who will host a sister event early next week. And finally, a thank you to Dan Sultan for performing the opening song. Dan is a 6-time Aria Award winning singer-songwriter. That was a wonderful performance and it's fantastic to have you with us this evening. I'm looking forward to hearing from you again to close the evening. Before we continue with the evening, I want to pause to acknowledge the events of recent weeks. Tonight we stand in solidarity with the family of Cassius Turvey. We've all been deeply shocked and saddened by the death of an innocent young boy with his life in front of him. As the Uluru Statement from the Heart notes, our children should be our hope for the future. No child should have to fear walking home from school. I'm now pleased to introduce the Chair of the Sydney Peace Foundation, Archie Law.
Thank you, Susan. Mandatory adjustment. I'm thrilled that we're all here after 3 long years. This year is particularly special for us with the laureate of this year's prize, and I'd like to thank the jury for their deliberations and their recommendation to the council. They've done a fantastic job. I'd also like to thank the Peace Foundation Council, a sturdy group of volunteers. Thank them for their wisdom, their compassion and their friendship. Tonight, the Sydney Peace Prize is going to be accepted by Professor Megan Davis and Pat Anderson AO. They are being awarded the prize for bringing together Australia's First Nations people around a clear and comprehensive agenda for healing and peace within our nation and delivering self-determination for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that enables Australia to move into the future united and confident. The Uluru Statement from the Heart is the largest and most comprehensive consensus of First Nations peoples on the issue of recognition in Australian history. And this is important because true peace only comes about when there is also justice. The Uluru Statement from the Heart not only asks for peace and justice in this country, it was developed through a just process. The Uluru Dialogues gave voice to the voiceless. The dialogues were inclusive and locally led. They are a comprehensive set of talks across the nation that ultimately led to an incredible consensus 5 years ago at Uluru. And the result? The Uluru Statement from the Heart is an extraordinary peace offering to all Australian people. The statement is extraordinary not just because of the just future it envisages, but because it asks us all to be part of making peace together. And here's the thing. Today we are not a country of peace. When we stand on lands that have been forcefully taken with no voice, no recognition for First Nations people in our Constitution, then we are not living in a country of peace. When there have been more than 500 deaths in custody with not a single conviction since the Royal Commission concluded in 1991, then we're not living in a country of peace. And when a young boy can't walk safely home from school, we're not living in a country of peace. But we have a chance. A voice for First Nations people powerfully enshrined in our Constitution will give us all that chance to step forward together. And the offer, the humble and powerful ask of the Uluru Statement is what we all choose to take that pathway. And the statement asks us all to make peace together in this country. We cannot squander this chance. And all of this, my friends, is why we are absolutely delighted to honour the statement and to award it the Sydney Peace Prize tonight. The prize, Australia's only international prize for peace, is tonight honouring this pathway to peace in our own land. And Australians are ready to vote yes at an eagerly awaited referendum on a First Nations voice to Parliament. As a country, we have never been more ready for change. The Uluru Statement, it's addressed to all Australians because it's us who have the power to make this change through voting yes and sharing our support. Today, we're asking you to make that commitment of support. Have the conversations at home, with your friends, at work, even with the grumpy old bugger down the road. But friends, history is calling. And thank you all for your support, and I'm sure you're going to love tonight's celebration of the 2021-2022 Sydney Peace Prize laureates. We're going to see a video soon, but I'd just like to introduce our laureates and our interviewer for the evening. After you've seen a short video, we'll be beginning with the Sydney Peace Prize lecture, which will be delivered by Professor Megan Davis. Megan will then join Narelda Jacobs and Pat Anderson AO in conversation before we end up closing the evening with another number from Dan Sultan. Firstly, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Narelda Jacobs. Narelda is a well-known journalist with Network 10 and NITV in Sydney. Prior to her appointment as a panellist and a reporter on 10's Studio 10, she had a long and successful career as a news presenter in Western Australia. So a big welcome to Narelda. Pat Anderson AO is what you might call in the vernacular a dead set legend. Pat is a proud Alawarra woman from the Northern Territory. She's one of our most recognised and celebrated social justice warriors. She's dedicated much of her life advocating for improved health, education and protection outcomes for First Nations people in this country. So big welcome to Pat. Professor Megan Davis, one of the most prominent Australians in this country. Megan is a Cobble woman from the Burrungam Nation in southwest Queensland. As well as co-chairing the Uluru Dialogues with Pat Anderson, Megan's a Professor of Law, Pro-Vice-Chancellor Indigenous at UNSW, and continues her legal work through its Indigenous Law Centre. She holds the Balnaves Chair in Constitutional Law and is a globally recognised expert and authority on Indigenous people's rights. So a huge welcome to Megan. Okay, thank you. Have a great night.
I think the messaging from the Uluru Convention is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are going to take control back of this recognition process. I think what we heard from all the dialogues was overwhelmingly universal in that people wanted the tools to make an actual difference to their lives on the ground. We distilled all of the information that the 13 dialogues gave us and came out with a model that involved treaty making, a voice to the Parliament, and a truth commission.
We cannot continue to go on anymore being voiceless and powerless in our own lands. So far we don't have any say in any legislation, any policy at all. So from here, what we're saying to Australia is this relationship between us, this very poor relationship, full of rampant racism and what have you, has to stop. The country has to be mature and sophisticated enough to have an intelligent conversation so we can all move forward and solve this unfinished business between us all, because it's definitely time.
People want to make sure the truth is never forgotten and that we as Australians, we can talk truthfully about the past. We should never let the past be a burden upon us, but at the same time, it will always be a burden if we don't face up to it. And denial is no solution to that burden. In fact, the weight of that burden increases the more determined we are to try and force a denial and a forgetfulness about it. So one of the really strong messages from all of the dialogues, but emphasised here this week, is that the First Nations want our own people and the rest of Australia to engage in a process of truth-telling, a lot like other societies that have been racked by division and the wounds of the past. A lot of other societies have established truth-telling processes to lay the groundwork for a more united future, and this is what our people have done here this week.
In my work as a United Nations expert, I've been able to look across, the 70 countries of the United Nations who have significant Indigenous populations and see that that kind of voice to the Parliament, that kind of parliamentary institution is quite a conventional way that member states accommodate Indigenous peoples within the state. So it's no surprise to me that that has come up as a significant legal reform option for communities who feel like they don't have any power and they don't have any voice. And what we did hear from the dialogues right around the country is a very strong sense of powerlessness and voicelessness. People feel they don't have community control anymore. They feel like their communities are run from Canberra. And I think that's a really important message for the Prime Minister and opposition leader to hear, that communities feel so profoundly unhappy with the way Aboriginal polities are situated and located within the life of the Australian state.
There's heaps of overlap, heaps of common ground, heaps of common themes, and of course the consensus was around us calling for a voice to Parliament, constitutionally mandated. It is a substantial proposal. It's a critically important proposal. And the message that came out of the dialogues was unanimous on this, and it was confirmed as the priority. But the hopes of our people are that it will be this voice that sets up the next stage of our movement towards agreement making under a Makarrata Commission. The old idea of a Makarrata is more than 30 years old. It's a well-established idea, a Yolngu name for people coming together after a disagreement. And so the concept of the Makarrata has been re-invoked in our struggle, and where the Uluru Statement says that one of the functions of the Voice to Parliament is to advocate with government the establishment of a Makarrata Commission to supervise agreement making between First Nations and governments.
It is a great honour tonight to receive the Sydney Peace Prize for the Uluru Statement from the Heart on behalf of myself, Pat Anderson and Noel Pearson. I acknowledge the presence of Mark Liebler here tonight, who was the co-chair of the Referendum Council, and we recognise and celebrate the men and women of the Uluru Dialogues who are here tonight. We also recognise those dialogue members who have since passed since the Uluru Statement from the Heart was issued. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge the extraordinary leadership of Pat Anderson. Noel would agree with me in saying that Pat's formidable leadership style really made this happen and led to the consensus at Uluru. The Uluru Statement from the Heart and the law reform proposal voice Makarrata was a game changer for the nation. in what was a languishing reconciliation and recognition process in Australia. It was the culmination of an Australian innovation, the First Nations regional constitutional dialogues that were conducted in 2016 and 2017 to elicit from a sample of First Nations communities what meaningful constitutional recognition is to them. It sets out a roadmap for change for the nation, developed by our people in their own voices, because it is our own people in their own communities who know best, who know what is best for their communities. This is what the Indigenous right to self-determination is about. The First Nations regional dialogues were conducted under the auspices of the Referendum Council, which were the first of its kind since the Australian Constitutional Order commenced in 1901. Many Australians know that the First Nations were excluded from the drafting of the Australian Constitution. Therefore, this process, the dialogue process, was unprecedented in our history. And of the National Constitutional Convention held in 2017, it is the first time a constitutional convention has been convened with and for First Nations people. Thus, the dialogue process and the Uluru Statement from the Heart is a profound response to the historical exclusion of First Nations peoples from the Australian constitutional system. It is a profound response to the question, what does repair look like? 2017 was the year First Nations people issued the Uluru Statement from the Heart to the Australian people as an invitation. It was an important year. It was the 50th anniversary of the 1967 referendum. It was the 25th anniversary of the High Court's decision in Mabo. It was the 20th anniversary of the Bringing Them Home report. And it was 10 years since the suite of legislation known as the Northern Territory Emergency Response. Each of these anniversaries bring with them a sentiment Aboriginal people know only too well, that the law can oppress and the law can redeem. We know much about how the law can oppress. The law has played a role in the dispossession, oppression and subjugation of First Nations people from the frontier wars to Australia's lengthy period of compulsory racial segregation, benignly known as the protection era, to forced assimilation, to stolen children and stolen wages. It is well known, at least in Aboriginal communities, that as the Constitution and the Federation and Australia's nationhood came into being, our people were being forced from country, herded onto reserves and missions. Unbeknown to many Australians, from the late 1890s, Aboriginal people were the subject of draconian protection laws. Protection was required in part to prevent Aboriginal people from being indiscriminately murdered. It was the tail end of what we now know as Australia's first wars, the frontier wars. My Davis family are Cobble Cobble people, and they come from Warra, which is Barringam-speaking country, the lands bordering the Bunya Mountains and stretching out across the Condamine River. They were moved to the Barumba Reserve, run by the Salvation Army at the turn of the century around Federation. This reserve is now known as Cherbourg. This move to protection is described in a book by Queensland historian Tom Blake called Dumping Ground, A History of the Cherbourg Settlement. He writes, In the early months of 1901, as white Australians were undergoing their rite of passage into nationhood, another group of Australians were also participating in a rite of passage, but of a different kind. In the Burnett district of southeast Queensland, remnants of the Waka Waka tribe were being rounded up and dumped on a reserve on the banks of Burrumba Creek. From camps on the fringes of towns and station properties, they had been forced onto an Aboriginal settlement, established ostensibly for their care and protection. For the Waka Waka, their rite of passage was not into nationhood or independence, but into institutionalisation and domination. The two rituals were diametrically opposed. The brutality of the Australian state towards Aboriginal people imbues our constitutional order to this day. It is why I became a constitutional lawyer, because constitutions can create the material conditions for a dignified human life. Constitutions can provide the fundamental resources and material conditions that humans need to live a flourishing life and for Indigenous self-determination. This is what a constitutionally guaranteed seat at the table on decisions made about our lives looks like. The right to participate in democratic decision-making about our lives. The Cherbourg community has worked together to reclaim the old discarded ration shed, a symbol of the brutal regime of protection and unfreedom, where peas and porridge, flour, tea, sugar and rice, and salt were rationed out to people on the reserve. The old shed that was lying discarded in a field has been restored together with the dormitories, and today it is a thriving cultural precinct and includes an archive where Aboriginal people can research their family history on the reserve. Cherbourg's journey is an important one for the nation. In Cherbourg, they have reclaimed something that was brutal, even as the psychological and social manifestations of unfreedom linger in their community. This community has turned these dwellings into institutions of memory, survival, and reconciliation, coming to terms with the past. This is the process our own nation is embarking on. The law can oppress, yes, but the law can also redeem. The Uluru Statement from the Heart has emerged from a constitutional recognition process in Australia that seeks now to imbue the voice of First Nations people in the constitutional system, to anchor a process of agreement-making and truth-telling to follow. The exigency of the voice to Parliament is that the status quo is not working for our people, and most Australians can see that. Closing the gap is not working for our people, and in many areas is going backward. The Uluru Statement is much more, though, than this. After all that has happened, the question was, what does repair look like? Repair looks like voice, Makarrata. Voice, treaty, then truth. When we ran the First Nations dialogues, a deliberative process aimed at eliciting from communities what meaningful constitutional recognition looks like, many of our people were cynical, and they deserved to be cynical. We said to them, law reform is about imagination. Law reform requires us to exercise our imagination and dream of a better day. What does a better world look like? Imagine that Australia can be a better place for your family and your children and your grannies. Suspend your disbelief that Australia cannot change. Suspend your disbelief that you won't be heard. And on the second day of the dialogues, they turned up, rolled up their sleeves and got to work. These men and women, old and young, of the Uluru Dialogues, gave up 3 days of their time to come and talk about the Australian Constitution and to talk about how to improve our democracy, not just for them, but for all Australians. We decided to present the Uluru Statement from the Heart to the Australian people, not to the politicians. This is not about politicians. This is about Australians working together, like we did in 1967. At The Rock, we decided that we were going to stare down the camera and we were going to talk directly to the Australian people about why we needed change, about why we need constitutional change. And we decided that we were going to animate their agency and ask Australians to use their voice to help us get this reform across the line. Because retail Australian politics and ideology and set positions and tribalism and left and right will not get us there. The Constitution is meant to change. It is built to change by us, the Australian people. The Uluru Statement from the Heart is an invitation, a gift to the Australian people. Stan Grant Sr. says that language is not about who you are, but about where you are, where we are. When people say that this is about changing Australian identity, it is not. It's about location. We are located here together, and we have to coexist in a peaceful way. We're about to face, as a population, and are already facing, some really serious existential crisis as a people, as humankind, as the climate changes and the planet warms up. The fundamental message that a lot of elders and traditional owners in the dialogue said, in both the dialogues and the National Convention at Uluru, was that to face this battle together, the country needs peace. And the country cannot be at peace until we start to resolve this issue, the original grievance. And the Uluru Statement from the Heart is the beginning of that. Yes, Australia's democracy has been a successful democracy, but not for all, and not for the First Peoples. And after everything that has happened to our people, the killings, the massacres, the genocide, the compulsory racial segregation and protection, the stealing of children and of wages and of land, and the contemporary manifestation of this, youth detention, child detention, youth suicide, incarceration, child removals. Despite all of this, they chose love. They spoke of love. They spoke of the Uluru Statement from the heart. They spoke of peace. They issued an olive branch to the Australian people. And they offer this to you sitting in this room tonight, an invitation to walk with us. We gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did according to the reckoning of our culture from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise? That peoples possessed a land for 60 millennia and this sacred link disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe that this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionally, we're the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are aliened from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the Australian people and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement-making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. And we invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. Thank you.
Standing ovation for our Sydney Peace Prize laureates. You would expect nothing less. Thank you so much for that standing ovation. Professor Megan Davis, so lovely to be with you. Auntie Pat Anderson, so lovely to be with you as well. Professor Davis, we've been introduced to you already and heard that incredible speech that you've just given us. But let me introduce you to Auntie Pat Anderson, in case you don't know Auntie Pat. Auntie Pat is a Alyara woman. She is the co-chair of the Uluru Statement, is also chair of the Lowager Institute. We are in the presence of historical figures. I think before we get any further into our yarn this evening, it's been a really heavy time. We're going through sorry business as an entire country. And Megan, you've been travelling around a lot, and Auntie Pat, you've been travelling around a lot, and there's it's such a heaviness, but we're united in that grief. And just last week we were here at the side of the town hall, expressing that grief and keeping a lid on the anger, actually, because of what Auntie Michelle Turvey had told us to do. She didn't want us to be angry, but it's hard not to be angry. And when we were gathering tonight, there was some comments made that we should have a moment's silence before we get too far into the yarn. So that's what I would like you to do, is to think of Cassius Turvey, to think of all of the First Nations people that we have lost through circumstances that are beyond their control, people that should be with us right now, people who have passed away in custody, people who have been turned away from hospital with nothing more than a Panadol. People like Cassius, who was simply walking the streets. So I'm just going to ask you to have a moment's silence now. Thank you. Thank you very much. Gosh, I could feel the power in that, actually. We've had a welcome, we've had an acknowledgement of country, and I can feel the presence of the ancestors in this room tonight. They are with us. And I'd also ask for their guidance that I find the right words for the questions to ask you, and it's received in the way that it's intended. Auntie Pat, a lot of mention's been made of women who have been leading this process, and the vigils that we saw last week were also led by women. I mean, how incredible is it to see women leading this movement?
Not by design. It just happened that way, believe me. And women have answered the call, as they did in '67 as well. All the big movements in this country have been led equally by men and women, and women took their equal station with men at the time. Things have changed a little bit more recently. When we sent out the formula for for the regional dialogues, we said men, women, and young people as well. So most of the host organisations actually did have an equal number of men and women, and we also had youth come as well. So yes, this particular movement though is led completely by, mostly, not completely, we have some great men who we love dearly and work with us, but nevertheless, the numbers don't stack up. There's, so it is mostly women, but like I say, not by design. It just happened that way.
Women are being mobilised. We're mobilising.
Yes, indeed.
And the vigils last week saw people donating things like, generators, chairs, sausages, tents, all the things, and they were women, making all of those visuals happen. 44 visuals, I think, around the country, seeing hundreds of thousands of people. And the overwhelming message was that we want change. In this country, we need change. The change isn't from First Nations people. We're just existing. Megan, what does that change relate to? Who is it that needs to be the change?
Well, I mean, obviously, the Uluru Statement is a call to Australians to help us change the way the political system responds to our claims. So part of The Voice is about changing that political system, which is about changing Australia. But it also does require Australians to do something that they're not often asked for, and that is to really actively get involved in a very important kind of law reform proposal to help us persuade politicians of that change. Because often most of these issues go on at a state and territory and federal level, and they get no traction in the media. Very little traction. It's not like the 67 referendum and prior to that, where there was a lot more kind of forensic knowledge by journalists about what was going on in the space. There's very little coverage. And if it is, it's not accompanied, as you said in the press club, with a deep understanding and knowledge of our peoples, our cultures, but also the policy framework and the policy setting that actually leads to the kind of powerlessness that we experience in Australia. So I think in relation to last week, and I think what is a really kind of growing clamouring for change around the way police conduct their business, coronial inquiries, youth detention, the incarceration rates, the appalling child removal system or child protection system in every jurisdiction. There's a lot of incredible work out there that will actually can make a big difference in terms of change, but it's never implemented. And so, I've done one commission of inquiry and a review into youth detention in Queensland and one on New South Wales and child protection, and very little of those reports have ever been implemented. And that speaks to The Voice, right? It speaks to the fact that we want community representatives being able to talk to the executive and the parliament about this change. And it doesn't involve us being there in parliament when the bells ring. It means we're involved at the very beginning, at the genesis of laws and policies that are made about us. So the change, people might switch on telly and see these visuals and perhaps not reflect so much on actually the huge structural change that's needed here to change those situations.
Well, every aspect of the Uluru Statement will feed into the change, and it's all the different. It's short term, it's long term, it's never ending. There are tangible things that we'll be able to see with the advisory group, and then the truth telling is infinite. Minister Linda Burney said during the week that she didn't want another Royal Commission, but this is something that we can grasp, and Auntie Pat, we're seeing. We have real-time examples of things that could be improved with the Voice to Parliament, with the Makarrata Commission. There are so many. You must have so many times where you say the Voice could fix that, or the Voice could advise that.
If we have a Voice to Parliament, we will be able to bring the torment of our powerlessness and start to deal with that. Where I come from in the Northern Territory, we have 10-year-olds in spithoods, almost locked up 24 hours a day. And now I know there's a movement to make the age to 14. These are babies, and nobody gives a darn. Not really. We have really high low literacy rates, or people are not literate in English, and some of the younger people are even struggling with their own language. We're not going to be around in another 200 years if we don't stop this. And we're watching it all happen. We're the oldest surviving culture in the world. Isn't that something to celebrate? Nobody even talks about it. It's like the crisis with the environment and climate change and everything. We're going to go when that goes. Because if we're not well, our land, our country is not well. It's sick while we're sick. So there's a whole lot of things that are at stake here, and I don't want to be accused of being too emotional here. That's our belief system, that we and the land are connected, as it says in the statement. Now, we're in crisis here in terms of the land, and we're in crisis with us as well. Our children are not being educated, most of them, and they're languishing in prison, and we have huge issues with domestic violence. So all of these issues we have to deal with. You can't deal with them, it's for us. That's why we need the voice, so we can speak in Parliament, and the Parliament and the government of the day will hear us and do something about it, so we don't have to rely anymore on the goodwill of a Prime Minister or a Minister. That's how we've survived, because along the way we've had really good men and women who've made change and tried to make, but the minute they lose their job or they lose their seat, we have to start back again to ground zero, which is what we have to do. Every time there's a change of government, a Prime Minister, even a change of department, all of us have to troop to Canberra and again, over and over and over, justify why you need to give us funds so we can deliver services to our family. I'm sick of it, and I'm not doing it ever again. Sorry.
Yes. You said at the press club. Yesterday that the momentum is here now, and we have to strike now. The next term of government will be too far away, and people are still saying, the detail and whatever. And Megan, in your speech, you talked about it was Noel Pearson's Boyer lecture. He talked about the story of the Sydney Harbour Bridge being like the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Like Can you tell that kind of... It was just a really good way of illustrating it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think he was referring to a Channel 10 journalist who, I can't remember why, but he was asked about The Voice. Was the Shaquille O'Neal stuff. And, he said, one of the newsreaders said, what's The Voice about? And he said, I think it's like the Sydney Harbour Bridge. We're going to build a bridge from us to them. And that was the metaphor that he'd used, which is an apt metaphor, really. I mean, in terms of bridging the
I'm so sorry for bringing that up. That's a story to nowhere, I think. But what I think the way that it was illustrated was it's a bridge. That's the question. The question is, we want to go from A to B. What it looks like, how many lanes, that is the detail that's going to be fleshed out.
I got it all wrong.
Legislation and things. Is that still not a very good... Okay, let's forget about that. Sorry. That is my bad. Look, I wanted to talk about the hand, the invitation. It's just such a generous invitation, and we're constantly extending our hand. And Megan, at the press club yesterday, you talked about how in 2019 the election result saw some people leave the movement because of the hope that was dashed. Was there a time where you thought we need to remove this invitation now? We're being way too generous, and we're not being met.
So, I mean, I was along for the journey only because I'm a lawyer, I think. So I'm not like Pat, who's had this really incredible experience with working in communities. And so we designed the dialogues and went out, and so I was a bit... I always say to Pat, I was really taken back by just how generous our people were. And there's a real difference between our young people and how they talk about the situation, and then our old people and how they talk about it. And we started coming away from the dialogues, and I would say to Pat, wow, that's so incredible what our people were saying about not being shy about going to a referendum despite the referendum record, because these old people had huge faith in the Australian people to back this reform. And a lot of them were either children of 67 warriors, or they were from 67 themselves, active in that process. And they were the ones that were had decided, when we went out to the Rock, that we should actually speak to the Australian people directly. So we did have the Prime Minister and others coming, and then we thought, well, we uninvited them and decided we would go out to the Rock and read the statement to Australians. And that's the approach we took. But never have I thought we have to take it back. I mean, really, the Constitution is built to change, right? There's a provision in it that allows for Australians to change it. There is lots of complexity about how politicians come into a referendum discussion and debate, whether they're leading it or whether they're being dragged, or, you know, it's complex. You know, it's people talk 8 out of 44, but there's a lot of complexity in terms of the history of that. But we've never, people said, you know, at the press club, a journalist said, like, the fear of failing question, right? So you give a big speech and then they get up and go, what if it fails? Like, that's the favourite question. And we took an approach very early on that we just ignore all the no's. So when Turnbull, we got told by a journalist that tomorrow they were announcing the Cabinet was rejecting Uluru without any public debate or discussion, and we were pretty upset. Noel, Pat and I on the phone at like midnight or something. So we were upset for a day, and then we just decided, oh no, the no's actually a yes. So we just turned no's into a yes. Morrison did it a few times. You know, people were kind of like, oh, he's agnostic. And then there were a couple of press club or doorstops where he would go, nah. And people would send them around and it looks like a no. And we'd be like, it doesn't really look like a no. It kind of just looks like a yes, doesn't, you know? So we would just ignore and just keep going, because that's, you know, we never, I mean, now Albanese, of course, is committed to it, but you never knew when that would happen.
So great. And the timing of this Peace Prize announcement just means so much more after this election and after Albanese's comments. Your comments just then gave us a bit of an insight as to what it's like to travel around with the both of you. Are there just knowing looks that you give each other? Like, you don't even have to speak? Is there kind of a... is there an understanding of what you're witnessing when you go into a room, and you don't even really need to, you just kind of pick up on each other's energy?
Well, so I do all this, like, I'm the scripted one, so I do all the speeches, and Pat's like the super powerful one that just when you get her on a microphone without a script, like, she'll go off. And in a good way.
Like to the journos at the press club yesterday?
But I think you're more outgoing and I'm more introverted.
Oh, I don't know about that. Well, look, we work really well together. I didn't know Megan before we started working on the Referendum Council when I co-chaired with Mark Liebler there. I'd heard about her. We're a different generation as well. But we got on so well, I have to say, and we bring different skills and different talents to this whole process. So they've worked really well together. Can I just say something about, I don't want you to miss this. Everybody who went to Uluru and took part in that process, because there was a lot of people before, because the people who came to Uluru were elected from their community and from that regional dialogue to go there. So it was only they say it's only a short number, but in fact there was hundreds of people that sent those people to Uluru with the brief to represent them and to speak for them. So there's this belief, as Megan already said, that Australians are really decent people. They chose to gift it to you because they're trying to make the point that we all belong to this one country, but you have the power. You have the power to change the Constitution, not the politicians. So the strategy is to force them to force them to make change by all of the voters and the majority of Australians at a referendum saying yes. And that's what the people at Uluru and everybody who participated in that process, they consciously and with meaning and even love, because we have to fix this country and we're tired. We are tired of fighting over and over and over again, generation after generation after generation, and often not saying, and pretty much saying the same thing. You know, the Yorta Yorta elder said in 1930s, he talked about a voice to Parliament. And the mob that chose the voice to Parliament because they said the only way that we can make any gains here is to use your big law. And the big law for us was the Constitution. Because we have tried everything else, generation of us, I've sat on that many bloody committees, you know, advice on this, advice on that, you know, and sometimes you even compromise yourself because you think that you might make just a little bit of a gain. Now those days are over. So, you know, for all of us over 18, this referendum is probably going to be the most important thing that this country has ever done. And I think the time is right.
Oh, Auntie Pat, hearing you fire up like that, I mean, we were all tired leading up to today. It's been a huge couple of weeks. For you, it's been a huge several years leading up to this. And we just admire your endless energy and boundless passion to keep this going, to keep the movement going. Just finally, Professor Davis, what does this mean? What does this winning this award, the Sydney Peace Prize, becoming a laureate, what does this mean for the momentum of the Uluru Statement from the Heart?
Well, we hope it'll mean a lot. We hope it'll give profile to the statement and the invitation to all Australians. It's very important for Australians to read the statement. And the statement is also much bigger. It's actually 18 pages. It has the top Uluru Statement, but it also has a very lengthy Aboriginal history of Australia. So that's pulled from all the dialogues, and you can go and read that, but it's about how we see Australian history, because a big part of that truth-telling aspect was that communities feel excluded from the narrative of the Australian country. And it also explains the reforms as well. So that's the Uluru Statement, but we hope that it will give profile to this work and also to how important the dialogues were in the way that they were researched and designed and structured. We took all of 2016 to road test it and go out and talk to communities and traditional owners and peak bodies and run them through the method and get their feedback on the method. And we ran trial dialogues, Melbourne Law School, to run everyone through the full 3-4 days of the dialogue. There was a huge amount of work that went into this, using deliberative democracy techniques and theory that we got from other constitutional movements around the world, like Ireland, as well as a lot of Australian kind of method from things like the Constitutional Centenary Foundation, where little kind of community groups would discuss the importance of the Constitution in Australia and civics. And so there's so much work that went into this, and particularly over 2017 by the regional dialogues, who all just did an extraordinary job. And it wasn't a very nice time in communities either. It was very difficult conditions to go out, especially after some policy settings like the Indigenous Advancement Strategy had decimated the Aboriginal sector. And so people were not in the mood, and they were definitely not in the mood to talk about the Constitution. So the first day was really taken up with a lot of anger at government, anger at their situation, anger at youth suicide, anger at child protection. That's why it's in the Uluru Statement and we talk about it. And then we said, right, this is our opportunity to change the Constitution, have some form of constitutional recognition, we really need everyone to believe that the nation can change, because the Constitution is meant to change. It's built to change. And they did an extraordinary job, and they came up with a constitutional kind of solution that no constitutional lawyer had written about or come up with prior to the dialogues. And I think that just speaks to the wisdom of our people and what it's like when you get our people together to do those kinds of processes. And I think it says a lot for the future in terms of self-determination and how our people can bring their experience and knowledge to the table to come up with really clever solutions to our problems. And so I hope that the Sydney Peace Prize, and particularly, I mean, we weren't sure about, it was framed in the language of peace, that it was a sign of peace or an olive branch, because of course a few people push back on that, right? Why do we need to offer a sign of peace? Why do we need to offer an olive branch to the Australian people? Why do we have to issue this invitation? But everybody thought it was really important because we haven't tried this before. We usually put a statement on a bark petition and you hand it to a leader or a Prime Minister, and they take it to Canberra and then they put it in a Perspex box and they hang it on a wall. And then nothing in that statement ever gets implemented. And so I think Sally Scales is somewhere in the audience, one of the young leaders from the dialogues, but she calls it a hallway where they have a lot of these statements, the dead hall, the hall of dead statements or dead petitions. And we didn't want the Uluru Statement to end up like that. So we didn't do the petition. What we did is wrote something and just read it out to all Australians. And so we hope that this prize allows Australians to receive the invitation in that light, and to accept the invitation to walk with us. And the first part of that journey will be the ballot box, which you might want to say something about. Oh, sorry, I'm taking over now. Pat.
I'm just wanting to wrap up. I'm mindful of the time, and I'm going to invite Clover Moore, our Lord Mayor, to join us on the stage to present the awards. But did you want to have a final say? Please, I would love you to have a final say. Yes, we do want Auntie Pat to have a final say.
I do want to talk about the ballot box. There's a lot of misinformation, and it's going to be really hard for you to navigate your way through that, and you'll probably never quite work it out. But inform yourself, as Megan's already said. We're all going to have to vote, so I'm asking you to make an informed decision. Make an informed vote, one thing. But when you get into the ballot box, after everything you've heard or read or might have heard on your phone while you're waiting in the queue to vote, once you get into that half light of the ballot box, you're in there with just you and your conscience. And that's the moment when you have to decide where you stand, what you think, how you feel, and what you think this country could and should be. And we've got a long way to go. This is a real opportunity to make real change, and it's long overdue. So when you get in the ballot box, there's just you and your conscience. There's nobody else. So just do it consciously, and we're in an informed way. Thank you.
Auntie Pat Anderson, Professor Megan Davis. We are going to stay in our seats, and I'm going to invite the Lord Mayor Clover Moore to the stage to present some awards. Please welcome the Lord Mayor.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Town Hall for this very powerful evening. I too would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people, the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I'd also like to acknowledge the many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are here tonight. Welcome. And I want to acknowledge Archie Law, Chair of the Sydney Peace Foundation, Narelda Jacobs, moderator of our panel, Professor Megan Davis, who delivered the lecture tonight, Pat Anderson AO, and I think we're also sorry that Noel Pearson couldn't be here. I just want to say a few words. Since becoming Mayor, I have had the honour of presenting the award to many distinguished Australian and international recipients, ranging from Pat Dodson to South Africa's Senator Siki Holland, from lawyer Julian Bernstein to the Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz. And it gives me special pleasure tonight to award Megan Davis, Pat Anderson and Noel Pearson as architects of the Uluru Statement from the Heart and representatives of all those who contributed to making the statement, and we see the signatures there. In June this year, our council unanimously reaffirmed our support for the Uluru Statement, and we also committed to campaign to help ensure a high yes vote across Sydney. As a council, we have formally acknowledged the devastating consequences of invasion, and our consultations for Sustainable Sydney 2030 to 2050 have identified truth-telling as the first priority. We also support changing the date of Australia's National Day to one that can be shared and celebrated by us all. Advocating for a change of date would give us a platform for an honest conversation, not only about January the 26th, but all that flowed from it. We've asked Prime Minister Anthony Albanese to put this change of date on the agenda of the National Cabinet, and for our part, we are consulting with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Advisory Panel. That's our voice to Council, which we established in 2008. And with the wider community to look at how we can support a yes vote in the proposed referendum and how we can use our own resources, such as our library and communication system, to advance truth-telling aspirations of the Uluru Statement. And we also expedite projects. We're also expediting projects in our Eora Journey program, which brings truth-telling into the public domain of our city. We have for many years been a proud supporter of the Sydney Peace Prize, Australia's only international prize for peace and justice. And I could not be more proud to award it tonight to the Uluru Statement of the Heart with the $50,000 prize money. So please join me in congratulating the winners, Professor Megan Davis, Pat Anderson, and in absentia, Noel Pearson. Please join with me. And this one is for Noel.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. We are now going to invite you to come and take some photos of Professor Davis and Auntie Pat by the Uluru Statement from the Heart, the actual statement. So if you would like to come and take some photos, Auntie Pat and Megan, you can go and stand, take your trophy and stand by the statement, and you're more than welcome to go and take your photos. Wonderful, wonderful. Talk about making history. Several times over tonight, haven't we? How incredible. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, please come down and take your photos. We're not going to stand here for a long time, just a few minutes. Everyone is so keen to take some photos. We have some, we're going to hear some music from Dan Sultan before we finish the night. So I might get Dan to come out and serenade us while we're taking some photos of our guests of honour, our laureates actually, our Sydney Peace Prize laureates. How do you feel about that, Dan? This is great. Honey Pat, do you feel like the rock star that you are?
What's it?
Do you feel like the rock star that you are?
No, not at all. This is very embarrassing.
Who are the superstars tonight? Aria Pat Anderson, Professor Megan Davis, Sydney Peace Prize laureates for 2021, 2022. Congratulations, this is wonderful. Dan Sultan, please see us through to the end of formalities.
It's a bit of a hard act to follow, if I'm honest. When we first got here, I said it's a privilege to be here. I think that word privilege gets used a lot. I think it gets used a lot to speak about people that might be a bit spoiled, and I can understand why, but to be here and to witness something like this, and you know, I couldn't think of anyone who's more privileged than myself, and I feel very fortunate and very honoured to be here with you all and to hear those people speak. Sometimes I act a bit spoilt too. I mentioned my kids earlier. They're 1 and 3. So it's nice to be out of the house. I feel a bit spoilt now. So I'm going to play a couple more songs. I'm a big believer in positivity and construction rather than negativity and destruction. You know, I think it's longer lasting. I think it requires more effort and thought and heart than destruction and negativity. And so, a lot of my songs are really sad, but I've created them and constructed them out of sad things, and it's a cathartic way for me to be. So in saying that, here's a couple of pretty sad songs on a pretty happy evening. But writing these sad songs has made me feel happy, so there's only going to be 2 of them. Thanks. No, it is an honour, it is a privilege, and thanks very much for having me, and thank you for that amazing panel, those incredible people. Thanks. On the eastern shore, where the ocean meets the trees. They say the town is falling to its knees. When dawn brings dusk and blood red dust, tell me when to hold them down. Put the boats in the water and the children on our shoulders. For all the sons and daughters they're sending in the soldiers, safer than the ground. Skin burns as we drown, and it's all on fire. It's all on fire. And if all we know is the sand in our toes and a picture of home, through these salty eyes we're saying goodbye to all that we know. And if all that's left is a flame in our chest and a cinder of hope, it's all on fire. Along the western front, blown onto the land, it calls out for more. It beggars and demands. Desert wind brings changes, making different plans. Tell me when you hear the sound, and it's all on fire. It's all on fire. And if all we know is the sand in our toes and a picture of home, through these salty eyes we're saying goodbye to all that we know. And if all that's left is a flame in our chest and a cinder of hope, it's all on fire. It's all on fire. Thank you. Thought they were coming to get me off. It's like, righto. Let's get the genius back. The genius is back out here. Enough for you. Big change. People say things don't change. That's the one thing that stays the same, you know. Things always change. I had an interview in 2010. They asked me what my favourite thing to do on Australia Day was, you know. And it was a different time. And it was at an awards ceremony, and I cleaned up that night, just quietly. I did well. And there were some papers, they didn't only not say what I felt about Australia Day, which I'm sure a lot of you will know. But there were some papers that didn't even report that I'd won anything, you know. And then there were some that said it was tokenism that I'd won anything. Anyway, I've been cleaning up ever since, so... So, you know, things change, you know. It's interesting when Honey Pat was talking about it's just you and your conscience. It's true. I think we live in one of the most highly functioning democracies on the planet, in this planet's history. You know, I mean, what's the problem here? Is it that is that Kyle Sandilands is still on TV, or is it that he's on TV because we watch him? You know, that's where we're at. So we can decide. Anyway, here's another sad song. This song was on that record that I won a few awards that night for that record. Anyway, thanks for having me, and have a great night. Cheers. Noel, I walked in here off the dirty mile. I swaggered in with a prison style, with aching bones and dirty feet, in need of a bed and for something to eat. I played for you and I played it right. I've sung in tune and I've danced all night. I looked at you as the only one. I didn't know that it had come undone. When my mother died and then my daddy got me. I've been locked up since 21, and I was my mother's only son. I've forgotten most of the early days, but I remember what she used to say. She said, little boy, you're my pride and joy. You're the only good thing about old Fitzroy. And it makes me love that old town somehow. And I've been drinking all the wrong things all night, thinking about what I gotta do to survive this life. Thank you. See you later. Cheers.